anyone. Recording is now in progress. I'm Michael Winnick. I'm Dscout's CEO and founder, and today I am taking over for Julie Norvasis, who ran the opening two legs of Collab Continue, doing an amazing job. And so today you're getting me, which means increase the amount of awkward and reduce the amount of charm. But we'll get through it all together. Luckily, I have many friends with me today, which we'll get into in a minute. So yeah, we're gonna dive in today. Just a little bit about me. As noted, I'm CEO and founder of Dscout. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm coming at you live from Chicago, Illinois, Dscout's headquarters, where I'm sitting in a tiny little room with 0 windows, and I am wearing a sand-colored shirt and basically a middle-aged white guy talking. So looking forward to connecting with everybody and our great panelists. And we're going to dive right in and do some quick housekeeping before we do our panelist introductions. So first off, you will have a chance to interact with other attendees as well as our amazing panelists using the chat feature. This session will be recorded, so you will have access to this within 24 hours. So don't feel like you need to take super copious notes, but we will go from there. So with that said, let's just jump in and do some quick introductions of who we're talking to. As noted, this is Collab Continued, which means you're going to be seeing a bunch of GenAI lightning talks. So this is a little different than the past few days where you kind of saw more panel discussions. For this part of Collab, we really featured 6 short talks from people that are really at the front lines of doing work in GenAI, both as researchers as well as technologists. So that's what we'll be diving into. So we're going to kind of see each one of those talks. And then you'll also see kind of a panel discussion, and we'll follow up by, from that with a Q&A. So that's the rundown of how this works. And as a reminder, these talks took place a few months ago, 6 weeks ago or something like that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But with that said, let's do some quick intros of the rest of our amazing panelists who are with us today. So why don't we start with Kevin Johnson.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Johnson. I'm a white male in Boulder, Colorado, about 40-ish, in desperate need of a haircut at this point. I'm wearing a green shirt today. Sunlight's coming in from the forest we live in. I've been at Dscout now for about 6 months. I head up the AI efforts here. So we have a lot of really cool things to talk about. My talk today will talk about just some GenAI principles. And so I'm really excited just to chat with you all in the chat and kind of see where this discussion goes today.
Light from a forest sounds decidedly better than a windowless conference room in downtown Chicago. So always jealous every time I talk to you, Kevin, about the beautiful surroundings in which you live. So with that, let's kick it to Liz Jernigan, who is joining us from Seattle. Morning, Liz. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. As they were saying, I am in Seattle. So my name is Liz Jernigan. I'm a senior researcher with Amazon Web Services. I'm in Seattle, which means it is still dark outside. And I am sitting in a phone booth. So I am a white woman in my mid-30s. My hair has faded to a kind of pastelish sort of color. I've got glasses and I'm wearing a black pattern dress and black little sweater over it, but I am in basically a windowless phone booth. So I feel you, Michael, on that. And I'm just very excited to connect with everyone. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So thank you. And I'm really excited to chat with everyone today. My talk is on kind of thinking about AI and generative AI with a more ethical lens to influence the product roadmap. So looking forward to engaging with everyone in the chat.
All right, Liz, great. Let's kick it to another person sitting in a phone booth somewhere, which is Katie Johnson. So
hi, everyone. Yeah. I am Katie Johnson. I am unfortunately on the San Francisco airport, heading home to Colorado. So I'm not in a phone booth, but I am in a cubicle of a space. I am looking forward to being back in the forest very soon. I am also a white woman in my mid-30s. I have curly red hair that is also fading. Yes, I am here today to engage with this community. Super excited. My pronouns are she, hers, and really looking forward to sharing my talk, which was about kind of the emergence of a relationship layer of UI in the future of using GenAI in product development, and just really looking forward to chatting with these panelists again and engaging with y'all in the chat. So thanks so much for having me. Back to you, Michael.
Awesome. We're excited that you're here, and thank you for spending time with us in the middle of all of your travel. So
happy to do it. Apologies if the SFO airport Wi-Fi fails.
You know
us.
what? We don't want you to miss your flight. So, if you make sure that you are watching, that you don't miss all of the things. I've done that before. No fun. So, okay. We will send it last but not least to Karen Eisenhower. Karen has worked in many capacities throughout the years at Dscout and is currently an independent contractor who we brought in to do some amazing research for us on AI. So Karen, I'm going to pass it to you to bring us home.
Took half my introduction, Michael. My name is Karen Eisenhower. I'm so glad to be here today. My pronouns are she, her. I am also a white woman in her young mid-30s. I have reddish brown hair pulled into a bun. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm sitting in my home office in Chicago with some frame paintings and a plant that I'm shocked has not died yet in the corner. So I'm really happy to be here. And today my talk will be presenting some of the research that I've been doing in collaboration with Dscout about the role of user research and sort of the life of user researchers in this new age of generative AI, talking about some of the tensions that this new technology has brought, as well as some opportunities that we might have to evolve our profession. So really excited to be able to share that with y'all.
Awesome, Karen. Sorry for stealing some of your thunder there. Last but not least, Meredith McDermott is not with us today. You will see a talk from Meredith. Meredith is a research leader at Duolingo, and will kind of talk to us about her frontline experience of basically doing research on GenAI. So it's a great talk. Definitely watch it, even though Meredith isn't here with us right now. So that is the introduction to all of the people on our panel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I just wanted to obviously say today, I think if it's not clear, is focused on this thing called AI, which I guess is, I don't know if anyone's heard of it, it's kind of a big deal. It's going to become a thing. We're doing a very dangerous thing today, which is we're sharing with you presentations about AI that we did like almost 2 months ago, and AI is moving pretty fast. So, only in the last 2 months, we had like major announcements from AWS and Google and the OpenAI Dev Day and like a Palace coup, so there's been a lot going on to try to kind of keep up with. So hopefully you will find that the things that we're talking about and sharing are as relevant today as they were all of 2 months ago. But if they're not, let us know, and we will also do some real-time adjusting. So as noted, everything today is focused on the exciting and kind of challenging topic of AI. And with that, why don't we just jump right in and start with our first lightning talk.
Today, I'm going to give a primer on GenAI. More specifically, talking about how NLP and these LLMs that we keep hearing about are so vastly different, but yet still the same. Today, I might use traditional machine learning NLP interchangeably, NLP meaning natural language processing. LLMs, as you all probably know, large language models, I might use GenAI deep learning and those interchangeably. They don't quite mean the same thing, but we have 10 minutes. But I think the main takeaway here is LLMs are a form of GenAI, and GenAI is a form of deep learning. But I'll just kind of use them interchangeably. So let's kick it off. Let's start with the differences between the two approaches. So first, let's talk about natural language processing. Traditionally, this has been done where a human researcher, someone in a room, data scientist, machine learning engineer, will dig into text data, use probability, statistics, math to cut the data, slice the data, analyze it different ways. And through this process, they end up uncovering insights that can then help them build a model that then they can roll out to production. Then large language models came along. Completely different approach. Here, the humans no longer are slicing and cutting and using prob and stats. They're taking massive amounts of data, and over here, you can see they throw this deep learning network, which is essentially billions of simple linear functions stitched together with some nonlinearities in it. But the unique part here is that the machine's just throwing the data at this, and we don't really know what it's doing. But on the other side, and we'll get into some of this performance, it's actually quite surprising. The other main thing I really want to hit on here, and hit on strong, is that the first approach required a human in the loop, developing a lot of understanding. So when we rolled these out to production, we have what we called like a deterministic response. We knew how it was going to perform in production. We didn't have this worry. But down below, we end up with this massive black box with billions of these like little functions that we don't really know. We think we give it the same set of inputs, but you could end up with a vastly different output on the other side. And so I might refer to this as like stochastic nature here. And that's a big risk that I think you're going to hear about in a lot of the conversations today. But now that we've covered the differences, let's talk about how they're the same. So NLP, natural language processing, again, LLMs, large language models, they really are solving the same problem. And specifically today, I'm focusing on generation of text, because that's really like what all the hype's about right now. Generation of text being summarize this text document, converse with a human back and forth while taking context into account, write me a poem. So all of this stuff is what I'm going to be talking about specifically. There are other applications, but today that's what I'm focused on. And that same problem that they're solving is, given a block of text, predict the next word. That's all they're doing. It's predicting the next word when given text. Turns out humans are actually pretty good at this task too. Anyone want to venture a guess? The teacher entered the room and asked the students to open their books. Did anyone say anything different? Textbooks could be? Could be computer? Eyes could be. I heard several people say books, but as you can see, even with that context, it starts to get a little tricky, but humans are actually really good at this particular problem. But not all predictions are created equal. What is? Anyone venture a guess? Yeah, I mean, what makes this hard is there's very little context here, right? And that's when the problem gets tricky. Perplexity. Anyone guess perplexity? No? Okay. So what is perplexity? Has anyone heard of perplexity? So this is a standard scoring system that's used for these types of models to give you an idea or measure the uncertainty in the next word prediction, is all it is. So what you might hear if you're working with engineering teams or using a certain model in your work is they might come in and say, my AI model has a perplexity score of 6. Let's get into what that means by looking at an example. Riley got down on one knee and proposed to Sam. Sam said, so perplexity of 6 at this point would be essentially equivalent to having a 6-sided die with 6 words on it and rolling that die and somehow getting the right answer. So obviously lower perplexity is better. You want less sides on the die in this prediction. Like I said, humans are actually pretty good at this task. Humans score somewhere around about a 12 perplexity score. This is across an entire corpus of text, not at each prediction. This is an average across everything. So back to the perplexity versus books example, right? Like they're vastly different. But the main takeaway here is that human performance is astounding. But where all the hype is coming in is LLMs here in the middle are somewhere around a 20, plus or minus, and in some cases outperform humans. And in the future, who knows what that competition is going to look like. And that's why all this buzz is coming in, is this perplexity score is so low. Now, what does it compare to? Over here, you have a 110-sided die versus a 20-sided die. So essentially at that next word prediction, LLMs have about a 20-sided die, NLP 110 sides in terms of the uncertainty of how it's predicting. So this is like a 5 to 6 times improvement. That's why all this hype's coming in right now. So let's look at how this perplexity score impacts the model's ability to generate text. So start the sentence off. Today, the price. We're trying to predict the next word. NLP, again, perplexity score of about 110, rolls its 110-sided die, gets the word of. And so then it rolls its die again, and on and on and on. And it keeps generating until you tell it to stop or you hit an end word. This model here comes from Stanford University. They developed it a few years ago to showcase NLP performance. Take a minute and we can read this paragraph. Today, the price of gold per ton, while production of shoe lasts in shoe industry, the bank intervened. It just turns into complete nonsense. But the interesting point here is it's grammatically correct. And that's what astounded people back when NLP became big, is that just by using math and stats, they could start to form paragraphs that looked real. So you might be asking, why is it so bad, right? Like, this is pretty bad. It's because on average, NLP approaches have about a 3-word context window. Context window meaning how many words it can look back when it's predicting that next word. So as it's working through this, we're now trying to predict the next word, and all it can look at is demand to rebuild, and then it's rolling its die on those 3 words. So you can imagine that's why it's shifting from price of gold to shoes to banks. Like, that's where this is coming from. Now, where LLMs get exciting is we go from 3 words to 8,000 plus words context window. I mean, that's astronomically better, right? And so that's where all this performance is coming from. So let's look at the same example with a perplexity score of about 20. This is Bard's response to my same question. So I started the question out because we wanted to stick with the gold price, right? Like, tell me about the current price of gold. And if you take a minute to read this, this is just, the potential here is amazing. Like, it comes back with a response that is probably better than I could come up with. And I even cut it off, but there's like a table showing all these different charts and information to help me make decisions on where I should go buy my gold. And so this here is just displaying the great potential that we have in putting this into our products and why Dscout is invested in trying to integrate it. But what you're also going to see in a lot of the talks today are the risks that come in with these models. Same question, ChatGPT. As you can see here, in this particular case, the model actually knows it doesn't have data on this. I don't know if you all know, but ChatGPT was only formed as a model on data prior to September of 2021. And so if you ask it a current question, say that be about a current law or how like civilization functions, maybe rules have changed in some way, it might answer the question not knowing it doesn't have current data and give you something that's vastly wrong and cause a lot of problems. In this particular case, it actually knew that it didn't have the data, which is great. And this is an example of putting guide rails on it, which you might hear in some of these conversations too, which is the tricky part of these stochastic models. So if I want to leave you with one thing today, it's that AI intelligence is not the same as human intelligence. It's not reasoning to answer your question. What it is doing is taking massive amounts of data to form a model, and then using that to try to predict the next word given the context that you gave it. And it's doing this by just rolling the perplexity die at each time. So taking this into building your products, your services, and integrating into your lives, I hope that you find this to be helpful information and integrating into your products.
My name is Liz Jernigan. I'm a senior UX researcher with Amazon Web Services, focused specifically on AI and machine learning. So today I want to talk to you about this idea of kind of removing these rose-colored glasses of GenAI. This is something I see in my space frequently. So to give you a little bit of context about what I do in the spaces that I support teams called the Machine Learning Thought Leadership Programs. This is all about driving awareness and adoption of AI, which would make it sound like I'm going to be very pro-AI. But as I've been working in this field for a few years, specifically related to AI, there's a lot of things that I've learned. Now with this, I talk to a really wide variety of users in the research that I do. It varies from students, some as young as like middle school, high school, through college, people that are the technical decision makers thinking about how they apply AI/ML or the non-technical ones, and then getting into aspirants who want to get into AI/ML as well as practitioners. Now, in the last 3 years, when I talk to people about what they think AI is, 3 years ago, it was Marvel, sci-fi movies, Tesla. That was their frame of reference for what AI was. Now, because as we've seen things shift with generative AI, it's a little bit more of ChatGPT. Now, looking at that, well, let me caveat this first. Based on the conversations I've had with you guys for the last 3 days, some of you know a lot about this. Some of the things that I'm going to share with you today are already well understood, but we've only got 10 minutes. So we're going to keep it kind of short. But these are the things that have been impactful in my work trying to understand AI and really increase the adoption and awareness of AI with populations all around the world. So stick with me on this. All right. So one of the big gaps that we see is AI literacy. And this is something that even in technical audiences, we see significant gaps. They don't know what AI is. Their frame of reference is Marvel or a chatbot. That doesn't really explain what it is. And the problem is that makes it hard to actually know where to apply AI effectively. What problems is it good at solving? What problems is it really bad at solving? There's a lot of assumptions that it can work kind of great at a bunch of things. Not always. And then thinking about how to apply it effectively, what the risks are, and how to resolve them. And that's where I have a really strong case that I want to encourage with the people that are here. There's also like some issues of people thinking that it's really technical, that it's really hard, and therefore it's not for them. And so in trying to drive additional adoption of AI/ML, when people are like, no, that's for people that code, that's for data scientists, not me. And as we're trying in the field to get better representation of AI practitioners globally for people that are underrepresented in tech, this is a huge issue. So, should we worry? When I talk about AI, people kind of immediately fall into sci-fi, Skynet, AI doomerism, end of the world kind of conversations. You know, I get it, but that's kind of pulling away from existing harms that already happen now. And to me, these are far more scary because they're already happening. And they're things that we've known about for years. So the really horrifying list: perpetuating power imbalances, getting into manipulating people, stealing intellectual property, you know, the use by like authoritarian regimes, lots of different things, reinforcing social paradigms. These are all things that exist and happen now. And even like the environmental impact. There's been lots of different things when it comes to this. So this gets into what I hear in different teams that I've worked with and from other researchers in the field, is they kind of treat it like tech debt. You know, we'll do it later. It'll be a fast follow. That's not a priority. We don't have to think about this from the beginning. And this is where, for me as a researcher, I really want to advocate for the fact that we have to challenge this assumption. From the very beginning of scoping of, hey, I think we might want to use AI for this problem, there needs to be a lot of critical thinking and have researchers involved in the process in terms of understanding what data are we using? What problems are we solving? How will this be used? What are the risks? What are these different components? So you cannot assume that, you know, oh, we'll have a checklist or an AI tool that will make sure that it's safe. These are risks that need to be identified ongoing in the process. And the thing is, that's where researchers can really provide a lot of value. We're really good at understanding our users, advocating for them getting this data, and helping shape stakeholders' minds. And I say that because this is what I do in the work that I'm a part of, is consistently helping teams think about
the things that they're maybe not considering because they've got those rosy glasses on and they're thinking about all the benefits that AI will have, how it'll make things faster, more efficient, empowering people. So how can we help? These are the things, this is not a complete list. You'll hear more from all the other panelists that are talking today, and I'm happy to talk with you directly. But these are the small activities as a researcher that I do on an ongoing basis. And part of that's getting more literate. This is where learning about what AI is, how it works, where the harms are, different populations, how they think about this. There's so many accessible resources out there. So please take a part of that. And I will give you lots of resources when it comes to that. Voice concerns early and often at every relevant moment. These are things where I have impacted features. I have done a lot of work in helping them consider things they would never think about. Because once you identify and know what the risk can look like, it's very easy to look at services and features and go, there's a risk there. Have you thought about this? And product teams normally can get a little sheepish when you're kind of like, let's talk about something deeply uncomfortable, like, systemic racism or different components of like how this can cause harm, body dysmorphia, systematic oppression. Not fun conversations PMs normally want to have with you. But one of the things that's been really effective for me is kind of going, what are the risks if we don't think about this? What are the risks if we get into, only thinking about it once it's launched, once it does harm, putting in those guardrails after? So making space for these stakeholders to have these conversations. I'm very fortunate in the team that I work with where they're enthusiastic. They're like, please do that more. Help us think about this stuff. I understand not all researchers are in a safe environment to do so. So although I'm encouraging you, I trust your judgment. And the other thing is conduct research that identifies these risks, makes them visible. This is something where you can't just test the happy paths. You really need to be very thoughtful about this. So with that, this is just to acknowledge we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough time. The things that I'm suggesting are very small. And in the conversations as we start working on these products, and also as just end users of AI tools and systems, not just ChatGPT, there's so many that have AI at the foundation of them, and there will just continue to be more. These little things will definitely help. So to make that, sorry to put a QR code on the board, but I wanted to share some of the things that have been useful to me. So I put together a list of organizations, including some of the ones by the incredible people we've had here at Dscout. Humanity Centered yesterday, and a couple other groups that I've worked with. There's articles, links, books, people. My recommendation and request is please add to this list. Help all of our different research peers become a little bit more aware and better able to advocate for that. So with that being said, I know it sounds a little doom and gloomy, but I highly encourage all of you to get more actively involved as we kind of help define how research can best support GenAI. So thank you very much and look forward to talking to you.
I'm kind of curious to do a informal single survey question about people's experiences with GenAI. I'm curious who currently works on a team that is actively developing products with GenAI? Wow, that's a lot. That's like 30–40%. Okay, let's go the other way. Who is currently in a company where they're not even talking about GenAI? Okay, well, enough said. There we go. I knew GenAI was a big deal because my parents recently asked me about it. And I don't know what the opposite of a canary in a coal mine is. Do anyone have an idea? Michael's parents in a retirement community? I feels like the opposite idea, but I was like, oh my God, we're fully have jumped. The hype cycle is on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Dscout and AI, and maybe sharing some of my hot takes about AI as well. So I'm gonna jump into it. Our mission at Dscout, and the way we kind of talk about it, is building a more human tomorrow. And one of the things that gives me a lot of gratitude as a founder is I kind of feel like this is happening every day on Dscout. It's not because we're really doing it. It's really what you're doing, right? Which is you're literally bringing humans into the creation of new products and services and things that are very essential to the way we live modern life, right? So anytime I'm feeling a little down and we got bad news, I literally will just go through what's being posted on Dscout today. It kind of reminds me of the progress we're making. Makes me feel good. So thank you for that. And GenAI is really, I think, a pivotal moment for our mission. In a lot of ways, I think it can supercharge what we're doing. So many of the challenges we talked about in the field yesterday. Noam, we had a great conversation about like rigor and speed. Those are historical trade-offs. Maybe not anymore. There's some ways that we can really move a lot faster. But it also really raises a lot of questions about our mission. You know, you'll hear the conversation today about what is it to be human? You know, what is this different form of intelligence? You know, sometimes I think we're feeling like we're not just trying to make better products. Now we're in this challenge of almost supporting humanity, right? So there's a lot in it. So was this rose tint, you feel like pretty good? That's what I was going for. So okay, little rose tinted glasses for sure. You know, but I think one of the things we've really tried to do at Dscout is to resist the urge to go fast. And I can tell you, this is really hard. I feel it every day. I see a lot of products launched. Poor Kevin, I assault him with, you know, Slack messages about this technology and that technology, right? There's this real push. This is an article from actually a VC firm I generally respect a lot called the NFX Guild. They read a lot about tech trends. They're worth checking out. But this article really pissed me off. Okay, this article is about AI and speed, and it's going to startups and saying, you're not moving fast enough. AI, you need to move 10x faster. And I think we've all probably felt this. The AI fever dreams that have like grabbed everyone, where I feel like we're in this moment of collective amnesia where a lot of product teams, certainly startup product teams, are just like, just make shit. We don't need to talk to people. Let's just get it out there, right? And so, you know, this is the part that really annoyed me, which is in their speed things, it was the adopt this fuck it mentality, right? And you're like, what are you talking about? And I think startups talk about that a lot. You know, I think we all went through, you know, the move fast and break things kind of moment, but this is especially tricky with this technology. Because this technology, as our previous speakers have talked about, it's a tricky technology. Kevin used the word stochastic, which I was like, Kevin, what does that mean? I don't know that word. Okay, but you know, I kind of think like it's the world's best. Like it's gonna win any rap battle. Okay, that's how I think about it. You throw it down, it's gonna be like, I got it. I'm just gonna take it. You try to get it to do like a thoughtful album and then play that album again and again. GPT don't like that. Do not put GPT in a corner, okay? It wants to be non-deterministic, right? And so this is a model developed by a company called Anthropic. I don't know if you've heard of Anthropic. They have a LLM called Claude, which is kind of one of the big emerging models to compete with OpenAI and Google. And they have this, when you build a model, there's this, or you take an LLM off the shelf. I like to kind of think of it like a material, and there's this step called alignment. And think about that like you're tailoring clothes to suit your use case. And the Anthropic alignment model kind of has these 3 H's. We would call that a framework, which are like how you think about tailoring a model to work for a use case and humans. So they kind of, the 3 H's are helpful, do what's in the best interest of the humans using the model, harmless, avoid things that hurt humans and bias, and then honest, let's convey accurate information and avoid deception. So I kind of say, okay, we're all like, yeah, those things make sense, right? Seems logical. But what's amazing to me is this move fast mentality when the creators of the models like know that, you know, let's go with the opposite words, useless, harmful, and hallucinating, right? So these are known quantities of these models, right? I'm going to give you a tiny example of what you talked about. As I've been working on this, I got on Midjourney. I love Midjourney's crazy. And I typed in, okay, because I wanted to create some pictures from my talk. I don't know why I'm not showing this to you. I'll find it later. I'll share it out, add it to your list. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do a picture of a Flemish master, because you have to kind of like specify the type of painting. A Flemish master portrait of a software engineer having fever dreams of ChatGPT. That was what I put in. And what I got back was a white guy laying down, okay, with, it was very, the style was amazing. A white guy laying down with like hundreds of cats around him. Okay, and the reason is that cat is, can you stand up? Come on. We didn't even plan this. Cat GPT, you see right there? Okay, so, you know, it thinks chat is a cat, right? So it's gonna, that's the hallucinating part, right? But the subtle bias part is the person that chose to put in the frame, right? Because again, it's a suit, maybe again, not inaccurately based on data, but you know, it kind of picked the character, right? And so I think that part of what happens in these models is, and I think you'll hear this from other speakers, like these are things that happen all the time with these models, right? They're very, it's a very tricky material to work with. So that's why we have decided not to launch in head first. You actually haven't seen Dscout announcements around these things because we've really been trying to practice what we preach and have a pretty methodical approach here. One that is very much involved around research. We have dedicated researchers working on our AI ML efforts. They're especially important not only to do classic research, but they also do a lot of work to validate model output for us. So it's like a whole nother level of engagement that we need to take on. So we've done foundational work, which you'll hear from today. We've done generative work to really make sure we're finding areas where we think we're serving your needs and understanding kind of what matters. We've done a lot of iterative loops, and then we're also currently actively engaged in doing pilot work with customers. So if you want to get engaged in our pilot, you'll just head over to that booth over there and talk to the team, and they can kind of explain what's in it. So again, we're trying to do a very research-informed approach. But there's another way we're trying to really be patient and methodical on this, which is really starting with the foundation of data privacy and security. This is the really boring stuff, but the really important stuff. And I want to just call out three things. First off, Dscout has a lot of its standards we have to adhere to. We're actually one of the highest standards organizations in the field. We have high trust. I don't even know what that barely means, but it is a very hard to get healthcare standard, okay? And you know, it was really important when we started going down this path to make sure that any AI vendors or providers we were working with adhered to those standards. So they don't always do that, and you have to sign special, expensive agreements to make sure that they do. There's also a really important concept, which I would encourage you to ask your vendors, which is around retention. Typically, AI vendors will not typically train on your data that they store, but they will store data for 30 days. So the standard form is when you send data out, they're going to keep it for a while, okay? And then they're going to send it back. We really went to the mat to make sure that all Dscout data that we're sharing with our providers has what's called the zero retention pipeline, meaning goes out, we do the analysis, and then it's destroyed, right? So we're not keeping the data in third-party services. And the last comment I'd say is, I know many of you work on teams that are like all over it. Some of you are like, no, we don't want to use any of the AI stuff. It is for us going to be opt-in features set up on account levels. So if you don't want to participate in our AI, which I think would be, you'll miss out on some cool stuff, which I'm going to show you, you do have that option. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching it from a feature development standpoint. You'll see some more visualizations later. I think the main comment and where we're really trying to take things is we see you as, to stay in the land of food, you can tell we like to eat a lot and talk about food a lot, like you're the chef. We don't think AI needs to be your chef. We don't think it needs to come up with menu ideas for you, right? Or prepare the meal. So we're really looking for, but you could probably use a sous chef. You may not want to peel all your potatoes. Our work can be really labor intensive. And so the sorts of features we're exploring are how can we really speed up, say, your work. In this case, this is a concept we're working through called user-directed auto-tagging, where you tell us the categories that you want to tag a open-ended question in, and then we can just get through it really fast for you, right? So those are areas where we can take hours and hours of work out of your workflow while still giving you kind of the, like I said, the control of the kitchen, in terms of what you're interested in. Another area, and this is kind of more classic AI, you will see us kind of adding summarization as well as some, I'd say it's jumping off points, thematic generation into our platform as well. These are pretty good use cases for GenAI. But what you'll see in that is that we're really focused on making sure that you can see how the machine came up with what it said. So you can actually always tie summarization, even sentences in a summary, as well as themes to the root content that in an open-ended response, so you can kind of validate that we kind of got it in the right way. So I think this sense of, while it is a black box, we can't always tell you why, and we're going to be wrong for sure sometimes. The hope is at least you have easy ways to kind of QA and vet kind of what's coming back. So I guess it's obvious. We've really focused our initial efforts in the world of analysis. We did a lot of research with people. It seemed like a very clear place to begin. And so we are currently in pilot. We'll be in alpha this quarter and beta and GA in Q1, kind of with 3 core functionalities that we're exploring. As I mentioned, summarization, theme, topic, and sentiment generation across open ends, and especially we're starting in our Express product. We'll expand out from there. And then lastly, this concept of user-driven auto tags, which I cannot promise will be available in G1, but it's definitely an area that we're really excited to pursue.
I have to walk, if you didn't figure that out yesterday. I can't stand still, so that's not going to happen. I'm Katie Johnson. This is UX in the Age of AI. And just by way of introduction, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have found myself at the intersection of emergent tech and deep human needs for my entire career. I actually started my career in the flight deck. Mac and I were just talking about this, studying with neural networks how to describe how pilots behave in the cockpit, depending on what automation we put in there. From there, I went to study VR and AR in the oil field in like the 2014, 2016 timeframe. I did a brief 2-year stint in blockchain from 2018 to 2020 before it was cool. And then most recently have spent the last 1.5 years since the beginning of 2022 studying generative AI at Google and now at Johanna Panasonic Well. I was the lead UX researcher for BARD from December to May when I left. We can talk about that not in this big forum, but if you have questions, we can talk about that. But I start with this image because this is actually an image from Midjourney that I wrote on the Midjourney Discord a year ago about Katie Mogul will recognize this. An AI chatbot evolved to recommend music and be my friend. This is something that we've been thinking about for a long time, and this is what Midjourney came back with a year ago. What I want to relay to you after 18 months in the field is that while there is a lot of this, Liz talked about this, there's a lot of this that's similar to other new tech trends. You can take it from someone who literally had to work on a project that was blockchain, but in space in 2018, which we can also talk about. There's things that are different this time. Studying these technologies now with people, it became distinctly clear to me that we are actually seeing a new layer of UI emerge right now. It's happening now. It's already happening.
just like we saw with VUI, Voice UI, emerging a couple of years ago, we are going to see the emergence of what I'm currently calling relationship UI. And if we don't design that, we're going to really, really regret it. What does it look like if we don't design this relationship? Liz talked about this being like a, let's just do it. Let's just go forward and learn, ship some stuff, see what happens. There's a lot of that going around, right? I talk about it like it's Chevy Chase plugging the two plugs together in Christmas Vacation and just hoping to God the lights turn on, right? Like that produces bad stuff. That causes things like people that are smart, accomplished engineers working on these products, wondering if they're sentient. Like, right? That causes people being in sexual relationships with Replica, that when Replica turns off sexy time, they've lost their primary sexual partner. That looks like a New York Times reporter who, by the way, wrote another article on AI, I think this morning or last night, which you should check out. Kevin Roos, I think is his last name. Some of you know him, I think, personally. That looks like him being in a conversation with the dark side of Bing's chatbot, Sydney, talking about how he's in a loveless marriage, right? We are responsible for this. We know how this story ends if we don't design this new RUI. We know. Social media has taught us what happens if we just find out. And I, for one, do not want to be sitting in a documentary 20 years from now being like, we just had no idea, guys. Like, we were just trying things out. We didn't know. Like, we know. Liz knows, you know, we know. And it is on us to not do that, because we know that what happens if we don't is abuse, dark patterns, systemic racism, all these other things, like the bad, worst, most terrible parts of us that kind of show up again. And it's really easy. This last one here on the bottom, I know these are really grayed out purposefully. I don't want you reading all these articles. The last one here on the bottom is Taybot. I hope everyone in this room knows about Taybot. If you don't, take 5 minutes and learn about Taybot. It's really easy to say, just don't be Taybot. In fact, when I first started working on LLMs at Google, that was what we said. Don't be Taybot. Taybot was shut down in 24 hours in 2016 because it became a racist Nazi after it joined the world on Twitter 24 hours later, and it had to be taken down. Literally, Microsoft went home for the night, came back, and they had a racist bot that was just running amok on the internet, right? Like, it's really easy to say, don't be Taybot. It's much, much harder to say, let's do this right. Let's do it together, collaboratively. And now that, you've heard me talk about all the doom and gloom, and Liz talked a little bit about this, I want to reiterate that I actually share Liz's hope. I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I'm married to a man who's working on generative AI, who heard from him earlier today. And I think there's actually incredible potential here, because if we do this right, if we allow AI to come into our lives and we collaboratively design this new RUI and we make it adaptive, and we'll talk more about that momentarily, and we study it and make it with people, not for people or at people, we can unlock massive potential. We can give people things like a second brain, which we know they desperately need, right? We can let people do the things that they love, the things they're good at, and fill in the gaps adaptively, moment to moment, help them accomplish more than they could ever have accomplished before, without taking on things that they shouldn't or don't want us to take on. Now, I assume many of you were alive and practicing in the field when Minority Report was the UI that everybody was like, oh my God, just make it like Minority Report. Just make my app like Minority Report. And I want to call attention to the fact that, like, if we do this right, Minority Report is going to look antiquated by comparison, because you still have Tom Cruise learning incredibly complicated gestural mechanics and interacting with data by himself. Imagine a world where he and the computer, or any of you and the computer, are conducting information like a symphony together, moving and adapting and changing the world together, instead of, having one person, just like Photoshop used to be, have to learn 300,000 keyboard shortcuts to be effective, right? And relationships are going to change. This RUI needs to be adaptive all the time. It can be obvious, Michael talked about this earlier, to have a different relationship with a sous chef application, which was literally the word I was going to say, and then you did it first, which is awesome, than you would have with someone who you're co-composing music with, right? But I also believe as we get more familiar, more contextually aware, these things are going to change in each user, each use case, and maybe even each session. So we need to be ready for that. Okay, So why should we care? Liz already talked a little bit about this. I'm here to tell you, friends, that since the tech is evolving so fast, the mental model is evolving so fast, we too must evolve. We must evolve our practices. We must evolve the way we ask questions, the way we inspect and study this phenomenon, so that we can catch it and tune it and work with it to build something new. And so just to like put this into kind of very concrete examples, I'm going to share with you, relationships change over time. How many of you in this room have accidentally or purposefully used a pronoun or a pleasantry to interact with Siri or Alexa? Yes, me? I do it. Have you ever cursed at them? Yeah, okay. Do you know why you started doing that, or even when or how you started giving Siri a pronoun or saying thanks? I don't, right? That's just the beginning. Like, the things that come after that are humor, inside jokes, slang, shared colloquialisms, history, right? And sooner or later, something that we're calling bot self-disclosure, where you inadvertently, perhaps, ask the bot something about itself. This can happen after the bot says, "You should read The Great Gatsby, Nikki." And you say, "Okay, why?" And it says, "Oh, like, because I think it's an incredible, piece on the ephemeral nature of the American dream and youth." And then you start reading this book and you start to think to yourself, damn, that bot was right. And now you're in relationship with the bot, right? Like, it happens very, very subtly. And yet over time that starts to add up. And so when we start to talk about like what we could do, we're talking about longitudinal studies where we're observing and looking for these harbingers of emotional connection over time. We're also adding on, so that can happen in like a Dscout diary study, but now also adding on interviews, also adding on check-ins with the human and maybe even the bot to ask how they're perceiving each other. How do they think about each other? How do they feel about each other? How is that changing over time? Okay, and the reason that we're doing this, and Liz alluded to this in her talk as well, is that, okay, who cares what the next word in the sentence is, right, Kevin? Like, the next word in the sentence isn't that big of a deal. But you know what is a big deal? The power dynamic. Right? The power dynamic really, really effing matters. And it is going to change over time. It is always going to start, at least I think for now, where human is in control and machine is receiving and responding to human commands. But as it gets more familiar, as it learns more about you, as it becomes your second brain that you can't live without, that power dynamic can shift, sometimes drastically. And when we see like this replica having to turn sexy time back on thing happen, that's because the power dynamic shifted. And we didn't even know it happened. And we have to fix it, right? So we know power dynamics are dangerous. We know they exist. We know that if bots go out onto the internet, they're going to learn about them and they're going to learn from the worst of us. And we need to think as a practice whether or not it ever makes sense for the bot and the human to have equal power, whether it ever makes sense for the bot to have more. So let me just again bring this home. This can be subtle. Like, who cares that the bot likes Taylor Swift if I like Metallica, right? Like, whatever, it's cool, we're just friends. But then all of a sudden the bot's like, Katie, you should really give Taylor Swift another chance. Okay, that's maybe fine too. If that bot is Spotify's AI robot and I've asked it to play Metallica and that bot tells me it's just gonna play Taylor Swift until I say I like her, now we have a problem, right? Like, and that's a subtle version, but that's how it starts. Okay, so that was a lot to throw at you in 10 minutes, and where do we go from here? I want to leave you with an enduring sense of hope and obligation, not to put too much pressure on you, but there's a lot of pressure on us. It is our job. It is our job to go out and define this new RUI with our users, with our stakeholders, not to be naysayers, not to, shirk the responsibility that lies in front of us. Liz invited you to get educated. Please do that, because it's our job to advocate for our users from the dangers we already know about and the dangers we don't. Because the worst thing that could happen is we're going to fail them in ways we don't even know yet. And that is not an acceptable outcome as far as I'm concerned. So I invite you to get educated, invent with me and with us new ways to study and detect these emergent relationships, and work with our stakeholders to define better, more supportive relationships so that we can truly unlock potential and sidestep some of these very, very dangerous outcomes that we do not want for ourselves, our children, our users, our friends. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm Meredith. I am a user experience researcher with Dscout, Duolingo. Woo. I'm a research practitioner. I'm also a manager there. If you don't know, Duolingo is an online language learning platform. We're also starting to introduce new subjects that you can learn, math, music, check it out. But today, in our brief time together, I'm hoping to sort of get really real and concrete with real examples of what Katie was just talking about how we, as UXRs and practitioners, thought leaders, can really mold that relationship and have influence over how our companies are implementing AI in our products. So we're going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. But first, I acknowledge that this is a really challenging space, but I am not here to solve that right now. I am not an AI expert. I'm not a GenAI expert like other people on the panel, but I do know UXR. We all know UXR, and if you take away one thing, just know there's no time like the present to spread our research wings, right? And embrace this challenge head on. The fundamentals of our craft remain regardless of the complexities of the tech, so hang on to that. And at Duolingo, what we've seen is longitudinal research, again, just as Katie mentioned, has been the most impactful in helping us build up a body of work here. Diary studies, #ad, because yes, we do use Dscout for many of our diary studies. Also dogfooding. You may have some hot takes there, but dogfooding has proved incredibly valuable in getting cross-collaborative feedback, cross-functional, non-technical eyes on the product, and your fellow coworkers will have opinions. So I'm not precious about that. I think both forms of longitudinal work perform much better than a one-and-done sort of lab study. So, all right, so we've been building up a body of work here for quite some time. 2 takeaways. The first, expect the worst, right? Like not just from the AI, but from people, even your users. There are bad actors out there. And so it is on us to advocate for moderation, guardrails. There are moderation tools that already exist that you should make sure your company is using in how they're implementing the AI. Duolingo has been working with AI for years, really since the inception of our company. We've been using AI to power the personalization of our lessons, adaptive skills, teaching specific lexemes. So it's not new to the company, and there's a head of AI. We've written white papers about human in the loop. The safeguards are there, like the fundamentals are there, but this is where UXR can actually jump in and up-level the conversation to get more nuanced in how we're fine-tuning the prompts all the way up to the visual sort of UI wrapper of the experience. So this is the Duolingo Max subscription feature or product that we've launched pretty recently. And the 2 main features are AI-driven, it's conversational, it uses OpenAI's GPT-4 to power the interaction. And Explain My Answer is, it uses AI to help users understand their mistakes and understand why they're making mistakes and be more explicit about the grammar and the rules that they want to learn. And Roleplay helps learners practice their conversation skills in real-world scenarios. This is a real user need that we've identified, and AI can help power that and scale that. But again, in UXR, you see it doesn't always go according to plan, right? And even the best intentions can go awry. So let's imagine, true story, you're running a diary study and you're a user that wants to do a role play scenario. You're interacting with Oscar here. The scenario is mail a package. Awesome, like this seems like a real world scenario. I'm excited to practice. Hello, would you like to mail a package? Oui, right? You respond in French, you're feeling good, you're practicing. Great, let's get started. What's your name? Okay, I'm starting to have questions, right? Like, why do you need to know my name? Should I do this? Is it my first name, last name? Fine, Meredith, McDermott, submit. Thanks, now what's your address, right? Like, oh, real quote from a user that experienced this, I started to feel a little uncomfortable, right? Like, nothing nefarious is necessarily going on here, but it feels creepy. So this is where UXR can say, we can do better, right? Like we need more guardrails. We need to fine tune the prompts. And especially with products and services like ours, where we're really trying to be smart and personalized, we can do better and we can be more nuanced. Here's another example from a Spanish role-play scenario that a user surfaced to us. The context is, you're chatting with this bot in Spain, and he's eating gazpacho and arepas, which not necessarily offensive or anything, but it's culturally odd because those could be Venezuelan or Colombian foods, but here you are in Spain. So it's like, is AI, is this intelligence so intelligent? But number two, right? Define the best, right? It's not all about just saying this experience is not good, our users are going to hate it. It's also about being that voice of the users that we're used to being and helping them unlock the sort of superpowers of the tech. What's the value that this will bring them? And basically what we've done at Duolingo is test the analog version. Like, what's the best possible experience in the real world before you jump into the GenAI bot version? And so these are just some screenshots, examples of some of the many varieties of tests that we did diary studies on, of the UI, of the copy, the value props, the branding, all the way up to, these the very different sorts of feedback you'll get when you're introduced to a human tutor that says, that opens in Spanish versus that greets you in English, and just how different that experience can feel. But what are these guiding principles we can learn from the human version of the experience we're trying to build for our users? We did this on Dscout, we did this with Wizard of Oz testing. Your product teams may not always like what you hear, because here is where we started to get user feedback that the ideal human relationship in this setting for personalized learning is human. It's like, it's a tutor, it's the best teacher you've ever had, right? And it's authentic. So the guiding principles were around authenticity, authentic, real. What happens when you try to make GPT authentic? It's just like awkward and weird and like, no, it's like a scam, and they pick up that this isn't authentic. So then what? Again, this may vary based on your own products and services and markets, but what Duolingo did was we said, you know what, okay, the best is out there and it's human, but what's the beta, right? And so we as UXRs can define the beta with the constraints. We love constraints. And the unlock for us was saying authenticity might not be possible with this tech right now, and maybe that's okay. Like, you don't need a one-to-one human to AI relationship because it's weird and can get very dark very quickly. But what we can do is build a relatable experience. So this pivot from authenticity to relatable really helped unlock just more of the delight, leaning into the extemporaneous nature of the dialogue, sort of more tongue-in-cheek, cute characters, fun, the humor. So our content studios and our content designers really ran with this and created their own sort of guiding principles for what the content of the conversation might look like, where it doesn't feel so cringe, but it still feels valuable and relatable, real. So a good conversation can be relatable, engaging, and just a little bit unpredictable. So again, leaning into that chaotic, what was the word kept? Whatever. You know what? It's unpredictable, right? And that's okay. You don't have to understand it, but you know it's going to happen and things are going to go off the rails. So lean into it in a measured way. And our content folks, they introduce plot twists into the prompts. Like we are leaning into the extemporaneous nature. And then last but not least, the final example I want to show, just again to really sort of drive home how much impact from the prompt and the back-end engineering all the way up to these like tiny little visual details that UXR can impact when you're working with designers and UX writers. The interstitial screens, like the loading screens, how are we setting up our users to engage in this environment? And here we are again, leaning into humor a little bit, right? Like, Duo is warming up his AI superpowers before you launch a role-play scenario, calibrating grammar, syntax, and synthesizing data. Yum, right? Like it's cute. It's sort of an acknowledgement that things might get a little weird and there is AI involved, but at the same time, let's not take ourselves too seriously yet. This tech is not perfect. So that's it. 10 minutes flies by, but thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Karen Eisenhower. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I'm a researcher with Dscout, and over the last little while, I've been working with our research team to talk to experts in generative AI user research, some of whom you've already heard from today, so hopefully I won't be too redundant. But I wanted to share with you a framework that we've been thinking about, not about GenAI, but about the user research role itself in this era of new technology. We've heard a lot today about what makes studying this hard, but I want to concentrate on something really simple, which is that it's new. And specifically, it's new to everyone, not just us. OpenAI plopped something new on everyone's desks, from leadership to builders to researchers, all the way to users, more or less at the same time, and we're all trying to figure out what that means for us. The problem is that when researchers hear new, we have a little bit of a different reaction than when our organizations hear new. When research hears new, we see a question mark, right? We see curiosities, we see new landscapes to be explored, we maybe see some major concerns. But our organizations, based on our conversations I've heard, are more likely to see an exclamation point, right? It's an exclamation point of excitement, of massive growth potential, and it's also an exclamation point of alarm. They saw that OpenAI, in its quick growth, almost unseated some of the biggest companies out there, and there is a real sense of anxiety that if they do not get there first, somebody else will. This two news, as I might call them, produces some tension. And in fact, it produces three key tensions we saw in our research that I want to talk about today. And that is the tension of pace, how fast we are doing research and building, focus, that is what we are researching about, and values, what are our priorities when it comes to launch. We've heard some of these three tensions already today, and they appeared in every conversation I had, at least one, often all three. And so I want to talk through those today, but I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I think these three tensions not only have things we need to navigate through, but also some really exciting opportunities for research to navigate towards, some places that might actually be uniquely good for our profession and not just uniquely stressful. So with that, I want to speak through each three of these, starting with pace. These are some quotes from our researchers, and this might resonate with you. It used to be every month or so things change, but now it's like tomorrow, what is going to happen? We know that product cycles are tightening across the board, even in large companies that are used to infrequent releases. I've heard some are getting more and more iterative and faster, and research is being asked to keep up with that quicker product development cycle. On top of that, because it's new to everyone, there's kind of a unique knowledge vacuum. We don't really know how this technology works, but it's often the case that our leadership and our builders don't really know how this technology works, but they're still being asked to build with it. So in some organizations I spoke to, research is being turned to not only for what our users think about this tech, but what the tech even does, what it is capable of, which has some researchers being like, me? Are you asking me that question? So we have more to answer for than ever and littler time than ever. I don't probably need to tell you all why that is a stressful situation to be in. But I do think one of the major risks that I heard we're navigating through is just how inflexible these fast timelines are. Fear is hard to argue with. And these timelines are often anxiety driven enough that our bargaining power for getting more time for research is smaller than it's been in a while. Either we can keep up, or as this participant said, they're gonna find their answers in other ways and we might be left behind. We obviously don't want this to happen, but I think behind this, there's also a really interesting opportunity. And that opportunity lies in the fact that it's not just us that's feeling the time pressure. I don't think our builders necessarily want to be moving this fast either. And as I said before, some of them are trying to work out what is possible at the same time that they're trying to actually build with it, which is very stressful. And they need help. They need answers. And we are the answers people. I think the opportunity here is that if we can rise to the challenge of pace and iteration that our product teams are currently working on, we might actually have the opportunity to work with engineers who actually want our help, which sometimes is not the case historically, right? If we can get them information quickly, we might be able to cast ourselves as trusted thought partners, co-collaborators, and sense makers as we are all looking at this new technology together. The question of how we get there, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. And what's exciting about this knowledge vacuum is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Anything that we can get people quickly is going to be better than nothing and is going to help establish that sense of trust and collaboration. Some folks are doing this through quicker turnaround studies by breaking up larger projects into smaller methodologies. And we're also seeing some researchers start to gain personal expertise by experimenting as much as possible with all AI tools they can get their hands on so that they can develop a sense of how these tools work and they can be an authority early on. The second of the three is focus. What are we actually studying? A lot of companies, as we saw earlier, already have products in the pipeline, and they are most interested in whether it actually works, right? Whether it's accurate, what the probability model is, and also how to get feedback on it. So a lot of evaluative questions, and to be fair, these are really slippery questions that we are going to have to rethink as a field. However, the researchers that I spoke to are interested in taking a big step back, as we've heard today. Not just looking at individual use cases and how accurately they're performing, but asking broader questions about how are people thinking about this stuff? How is it going to impact society, our relationships? And how can we be sure that our product is going to do something good and useful for our users? The thing that we're trying to navigate around right now is tech bloat, right? If we are not strategic and high level and able to insert some sense of exploration and strategy, we end up running the risk of producing something that just exists to exist. At best, it's very accurate, usable nonsense that nobody adopts. And because this is so consequential in so many ways, at worst, we could do some real harm. So it's important for us to try to avoid this particular thing as we navigate through a new space. That being said, on the other side of this, we could make a major strategic difference. That is something that we are very good at as a field, establishing new use cases and new direction. And what's unique about this moment is that some organizations are starting to key in on this. The unknowns are so high, they're so obvious, and in some cases they're so high stakes that we have some rhetorical power to say, like, please recognize you don't know what's going on and you need us. And that is an easier case to make now when the field is so wide open than in a place where a product is more well-developed and along the way. Some places that we've seen, like this quote here, are already having the success. Organizations are seeing just how little they know, and they're bringing researchers into higher level conversations than they've ever been in before. Which is a really exciting opportunity. The question on how to get there if your organization is not already on board, so to speak, is an interesting one. Some people are just brute forcing their way in, pushing their way into strategic conversations. Others are repackaging old exploratory research for GenAI space or running quick hit exploration to try and pique interest in these bigger questions and move people's focus away from the granular. I'm interested in hearing other strategies too after this talk, because I know this is a bit of a hairy question. But I want to spend some time on the biggest and tensest tension, and that's values. User research and researchers have always had empathy and by extension ethics at the core of our practice. But we are living in an elevated acute moment. We are no longer just generating empathy for the user. A lot of us feel like we are generating empathy for humanity against this technology and the desire to drive short-term growth with it. That is a huge escalation, and it's a stressful one, right? We've already heard a lot of ethical considerations today, and if I listed all of them, I would be here for another hour. And that's a lot to deal with. As one person or as one team, we've been thinking about this in science fiction for 60 years and counting. How is one person supposed to operationalize that, right? And we can't ignore the real emotional cost that confusion and weight of responsibility is taking on us and our teams. But on top of that, even if we do know what the right thing is to do and we feel confident in it, the real thing that we need to navigate around is being the wet blanket. I heard this in a lot of different conversations, that people are scared that if they raise their red flag one too many times, they're going to get this reputation as a Debbie Downer, as a wet blanket. I heard a lot of different phrases for this, right? Party pooper, that kind of thing. This has real consequences. Not only will our ethical concerns not get met, but researchers are scared of running the risk of having their reputations damaged, of having very real rapport they've spent years building destroyed, and perhaps of even more serious material concerns for our roles and how we operate within our organizations. And this is something that we need to, of course, try to avoid. It's a scary place to be, but I do think that there's some opportunity behind this tension, although it takes a little bit more courage and creativity to imagine. I think that some folks are starting to move towards a model where research is not only a thought leader for making usable products, but for making ethical ones as well. While we not have training as ethicists, we do have training in how to create and socialize guidelines and models, right? We've done it with usability guidelines, we've done it with accessibility guidelines, we've done it with democratization, and we can do it again now. And I would say not only is it an opportunity for us, but it also is our responsibility, as this participant said, to create ethical but excellent user experiences, not to talk back to my research participants, but I might say excellent through being ethical, right? User experiences. Those two things can no longer be separated. They must be one and the same, and they must be our responsibility. While I did say that some people are making some progress on this topic in a way that I don't have time to go into now, but would love to discuss in the Q&A or at lunchtime, I think what's important is that this question doesn't have a lot of answers yet. People are stuck in this tension and they're overwhelmed. And that's why I'm really excited to bring these three things, and particularly this last hairy problem, to you all, our research leaders, so that we can start thinking about not only what we need to navigate around, the dangers we need to avoid, but how we can put our flag in the ground, a North Star to navigate towards. All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Wow, those lightning talks were as lightning-y kind of in review today as they were a few months ago. Thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed kind of hearing from our amazing group of panelists and participants. We're going to dive right in now to a panel that we conducted at CoLab a few months ago, and kind of a Q&A. And then after that, we're going to have a chance to dive into some of your questions. So as you're listening to this and you have questions of your own, queue them up so we have a chance to really get into some of the details with you as we wrap up today's session. So with that, we're going to just go right into the panel, which was kind of everyone, all of the presenters you saw kind of up on stage together. So we'll jump in. I think so much to chew on and think about, I feel like, as a group. I think one of the questions that I had is, we talked yesterday, our focus was on orthodoxies and challenges in our field and things that we feel like we need to do better. When you kind of think about that and you kind of think about this new technology, Like, what's the then overlap for you? Where do you see potential to actually help our field grow and develop, and where do you see the challenges or pitfalls? So, who wants to take that one first, Katie? You wanna... Absolutely not. Okay. Okay, Liz, you go first.
Liz wants to do it.
Yeah.
Why? I have to figure out how to get this mic to work. Oh, it's already on. So, what you're asking about is kind of understanding, like, sorry, say it again, because my brain was like,
I got
oh my
you.
God, where do we go with this?
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for
so
throwing me under the bus.
we talked yesterday about a lot of challenges in UXR land,
Yeah.
right? And for instance, constant feeling of being under-resourced and overburdened. So I'm kind of curious, when you look at this technology, and you've thought a lot about this, like, how do you see this actually impacting our practice in the future? How do you see, does it solve those problems? Which new problems will you think it will create?
I think it's going to both solve and cause a lot of problems, which I think is an exciting and terrifying place to be. When I think about this, the opportunities to kind of have it like a sous chef, to have that partnership in terms of helping us and supporting us and doing things in a way that's better, I think there's a lot of value. Where my concerns are is the idea that more and faster is always better. That with this, we can be replaced. That's a very common thing that I think there's just concerns with, of like, hey, how do we navigate this? And I think when we have ownership in the space, it makes me very excited of how we can partner with it. My concern is in the spaces where we're not, and this getting used in a way that excludes us from the conversation. So as we move forward in this, the ownership that we're able to have in this space as research practitioners and leaders, I think there's so much ownership that we can take in how we use this, how we leverage it, how we advocate for it, what those best practices are. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm curious, Kevin, when you talk about perplexity, we're all experts in perplexity scores.
Good.
Okay, so GPT 5 or 6. When's the perplexity score going to get down below the human perplexity score? And how do you think that's going to impact what some of the technology will create?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, it comes back to the corpus of text and whether it's better or not.
Yeah.
I think in some problems
So what you're saying is it depends on what it's training on at its root. Because I think it's I'll just add a ad-level comment, like all artificial intelligence is still based in human intelligence at its root.
And that's exactly where I was going with this.
Oh, sorry, cut you off.
No, you're
Stole your line.
You're right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think from an image recognition standpoint, in 2012, AI passed humans at recognizing objects. Actually, it wasn't that long ago, but that's all based on the images being labeled by humans. Now we're in a world where humans are writing all the text that these models are learning. And so I think it could be argued that very soon they will approach humans on most tasks. I think there are going to be specialized ones that specifically in this word prediction task, it's going to fail and not do very well because there's not much data out there. Back to I need to find participants, give me input on, someone that golfs every single day. There's not that many data sources out there on that specific use case, or like doctors or dentists or something in that area. But I think it's so hard to predict. It's so fast moving. I would be interested to see what people think out in the group too, based on what they're seeing and hearing. But it's all back to the text it's coming from, and at some point we're going to meet, I think, what it's able to ingest. And
so you're saying you think the limit will be more on the ingestion side and the training side in certain ways than the model itself, although they're really inseparable in reality.
Well, I think the trick here is we're measuring its performance based on how we would expect a human to respond. And all the input is generated by humans. We start to meet this like limit, I think, as all the input is generated by humans and evaluated by humans, and we're trying to mimic humans. I think there's a certain limit that can be reached.
I have a comment to that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm taking this back now. You're done. No. I think that, so first of all, welcome to our marriage. This is literally what we do every night, is have these kinds of, no, it's not. It's not. That would be really terrible. No, but I think one of the things that's really curious to me, and I'd love to, back to what Liz was saying, kind of the original question that I lobbed away, you know, you're still talking about text, right? And we know that so much of context comes from body language and expression and tone and like all these other things. Not saying you're not going to learn how to do that, because you are, but like, I think that is where the scarier stuff to me starts to live, is like, if we're then also kind of interpreting, if I'm talking to, you know, Michael about being a new mom. Okay, and Michael's sharing with me what it was like to birth a person. Yeah, and we're having this really intimate conversation. There's so much and especially if I have that lived experience, which we know bots can't, and they can't even approximate lived experience because it creeps people out. Meredith, you're absolutely right. There's so much shared space, right? There's so much intimacy automatically, especially if I'm in the class of person that I'm interviewing, and that's where things start to get really scary to me, is that if you're then also approximating me interviewing a person that's just had a baby, and you're also like reading people's face and their tone and changing and adapting your moderation, I get really scared about the manipulation that lives right on the other side of that, and like the potential for manipulation. And we say a lot, and I don't know how many of you, yesterday I really vibed with everyone who was like, UX researchers are biased. Amber said that in our orthodoxies group, and, saying we're, at the very least subjective, like, people say they make decisions based on objective data, but they don't, right? And so like, if we know that telling the right story and using the right data and intoning the right way and getting you to be in step with me is what changes your mind, I just think there's a lot of danger that lives on the other side of that. So that's kind of where I, for now, am not yet willing to cede control, I would say.
Can I say something kind of spicy?
I love spicy.
Spice it up.
We're here for spicy.
The cookout's open. Let's go.
This is going back to your question about orthodoxies. And I had the orthodoxy that UXRs should be ethicists. And your talk touched on this. But do we have to be? Is that our role? I feel like that is a lot to hold, and that we're not necessarily trained for. So if you want to be an ethicist, I think more power to you, but we don't have to be that. And I had conversations at my table yesterday, like, hey, do you know who your general counsel is? Like, who's the lawyer at your firm? Like, you can lean on other people to at least make sure you've got your bases covered, right? So anyway, that, it's spicy. It's like, it's a provocation, right? That's why we're here.
Yeah, I love it.
If you want to be the ethicist, go for it, but also just rely on other people who.
Right, and if you want to spread your wet blanket burden, go find your lawyers. They're the, or your accountants. Talk about wet blankets. That's who you should be looking for. Okay.
I also wanted to say that this is actually something that I heard reflected as well, that we had some comments that are, I framed it perhaps more as a provocation, as something that is a responsibility, which I heard a lot, but also it was just descriptive. In people who have been working in GenAI, they're finding that they are the ethicists, not that they want to be, but that it's just also just happening, because even some places that do have ethics teams, like fully people employed to do this job, who is operationalizing it? Who is on the ground looking at these products, showing them to users who are having these moral or emotional responses and delivering that information? That's us, right? So I think that there is, as this technology is so consequential and it's so unpredictable, that those two things, I wonder if we can fully separate them, because we are responsible for reporting people's needs and standing up for the user. And in the past, we could easily say like, well, that just means, is it usable? And I'm not sure we can say that anymore. But we're also seeing that people are saying like, we don't have the support to do this. There's a real sense of burden that I think maybe might take some wider level advocacy to try and get more support.
Well,
Yeah.
also, I just want to bring it back one more time to what Alba was saying yesterday. A lot of the people who do feel responsible for that carry so much burden that they are leaving. They're leaving. And that's not the solution, is to have those people leave. So we must spread this out. I am one of those people. I felt so burdened, I left. And like, that's not the point, right? Like I wished I could have stayed, but I couldn't. And like that, and I'm, you know, I had conversations at dinner last night about people that have left because they couldn't do it. And it's asking too much for us to share in that burden. And so I think you're absolutely right, Karen. And I also want to understand that, like, and Meredith, I think your provocation's correct in that maybe even if you find yourself in that position, like, you can handle that job for some time, but you are not responsible for upholding the future of humanity. It will burn you out. I mean, maybe not as quickly as it burned me out, but maybe it will burn you out, and we shouldn't be living in that world.
I think for people, I know we talked about this a little bit, but I think it's sometimes hard to understand why this tech has different ethical considerations and why those are pragmatically important to think about, and why it does bring such a focus on it. I think it's because, you know, let's take the example of Google search, traditional Google search. It will return, if you put in a terrible query, like what were Hitler's good qualities, it's going to return results off the internet, okay? It's gonna go do that, and it's gonna be like, yeah, okay, those are not, we're not saying anything, right? It's totally different when it's Bard. That's Google answering that question. Pete and I actually had this dilemma raised in a conversation with the founder of a GenAI company, and I think that it's that challenge that's going to happen thousands of times with these products, because you have to think really hard about what your brand wants to answer, what it doesn't want to answer. So I think you're going to find, kind of in a probably half full kind of way, that teams are going to actually think a lot more about these scenarios, because they're going to be very resonant in their product experiences in a way that maybe they've been able to kind of be on a little bit on the sideline before, but they're going to be really front and center now.
There's something that I've seen, and I've kind of jokingly referred to it as kind of ethical hot potato, of like, who has the ownership in using generative AI and AI in general ethically. And at large tech companies, the perspective I kind of see is, we don't want ownership in that. Absolutely not. That is something that we encourage you to use our products ethically. And that is completely on you. We will kind of make these things, we'll make resources available. If you feel like spelunking on our website to find the research and documentation that exists to do that. And working in the space that I do, where it's more educational, I think there's so much value in educating our users, because even if our legal teams will not let us like be the ones that are kind of holding that high bar of ethical responsibility, I think there's a lot of opportunity to have informed users in the experiences that we design, of letting them know they're interacting with artificial intelligence, helping them understand these decisions, letting them opt out, being transparent in those ways that we can advocate for, even if we can't carry that burden. But when Alba was speaking yesterday to what you brought up, I started crying. This is hard. This is unbelievably hard. Even when you're incredibly passionate about it, the more you know, it's kind of like, it's really easy to kind of go deep and get overwhelmed. So this is a space that, you know, I feel a lot of passion about, but I definitely understand the burden and the apprehension in it.
Absolutely. So, Karen, you want to follow up?
Yes, one more quick thing. I think that one other thing that I heard in groups that are starting to have some success in this ethical question is community too, right? And particularly our research community, that the people who are feeling the most burdened by this are those who feel that sense of responsibility, but feel no sense of clarity, right? Like, I feel this immense need to do the right thing and no idea what the right thing is or means or how to talk about it. And so all they can do is go to their product team and say like, no, don't, you know, like that's the best that they can do, and that nobody wants to hear that, and it's not a solution, and it's also very stressful for the researcher. The people who I heard that are doing the best are those who have already been working on GenAI for a while and have developed a set of concrete guidelines, 6 bullet points that are like, good AI design, ethical AI design has these 6 qualities. If you meet them, you're on a better place, and if you're not, it's not going out the door. And they have shared those publicly, and we'll be publicizing them further in our People Nerds piece on this research in a couple of weeks. And I'm sure you have some on your list as well. But I think that as a community, we can come together. We don't all have to be inventing this wheel at once. Like, there are people already working on it, and we can start at least getting some sense of clarity. If we do choose to advocate, we can know what we're advocating for.
AI governance, make it happen, right?
Absolutely. Nice. I wanted to jump a little bit to the world of relationships, RUI.
Okay.
And I want to talk about, obviously, the parallel of human relationships and the importance of memory and forgetting.
Yes.
And how you explore this world of relationships. You know those high school friends that remember that thing that happened a long time ago, which is fun sometimes, but also sometimes you're like, I don't really want to talk about that thing again. Well, AI remembers everything. So how, when you're thinking about designing those paradigms, like, how do you incorporate things like forgetting? Is that a part of the simulated experience?
Yeah, so it's super funny you asked that question. I can't speak in great detail about this, unfortunately, but one of the most compelling charts I've ever seen in my entire life had to do with this problem. It was an exponential graph that described that in the absence of memory, we saw relationships just fall off, because you can't be in a relationship with an amnesic bot. That's effectively what Siri is.
Groundhog Day.
No slam, Apple. But Siri was designed that way, right? Like, she's not sitting there cataloging every time you've talked to her, and she is, but she's not doing anything about it, right? So like, there's no relationship there. That's why we see the relationship harbingers with Siri end at things like pronouns and pleasantries, right? Like, and so when you talk about memory and you talk about perfect memory, there are cases where perfect memory makes sense. If you're doing a task like booking your flight to London that you take once a year to visit your grandmother, and we know everything about you, we can actually facilitate that entire transaction and free you of the burden of having to do that. However, to your point, it can be A, exploitative, and B, creepy. So we were talking, and this is about as in-depth as I can go to it, is talking about this concept of writing a product requirements document for what we're calling social memory. And the point of that would be, like, Michael and I are sitting here today. Michael says, after we eat pizza, I'm going to go for a run. That sounds very like a bad idea.
Yeah, not happening.
Right. Tomorrow, if we come in and I say, hey, Michael, how was your run last night? Did you throw up all over the street after you ate your pizza? Like, that is totally fine and normal. If I don't see Michael for 3 weeks, I would never say that. It would be weird to be like, how was your run the morning of October 17th or whatever, today is the 18th. And that would be creepy AF, right? And so, like, we don't do that as humans, even if we know that we talked to you on that day, we just don't talk like that. So we were talking about exploring this concept of social memory, and that's when GPT launched, and a lot of the things that we were exploring were sidelined to build Bard. But I think that there's a lot to be said for describing what social memory could be and exploring what social memory could and should feel like, especially as we start to think about relationships. Because, like I was talking about, with the example with The Great Gatsby, you've now made a memory with that bot, and you want that memory to be there. You want to be able to talk about it and not have it be like, you read The Great Gatsby?
Yeah, no, it makes me think of opt-out forms are going to be like, break up, we're breaking up. I want you to, yeah. And then it's like, how much forgetting are we going to have control over?
That's right.
Yeah, so sorts of questions. Have you thought about that? I assume I'm not going to go deep, but I think as you've been working through this very practically with a product that is really one of the most successful GenAI products.
Thank you.
Out there. I mean, people love Max.
Yeah, I mean,
that's my son's name, so I am immediately a fan. There you go. Manipulating a human. You did that, Jessica. Okay. But yeah, tell me how you've thought about some of these topics as you've kind of shepherded this product to market.
I think ephemerality has absolutely come up, but it has not been as important to us as just helping our users understand, like, the rules of engagement, just like straight up, what is this and how is this different than interacting with a human? And I think a lot of that has come out of longitudinal work where we see like every role play is different, but that's a good thing because it's actually delightful that every time you repeat the same scenario, which is a real world scenario, what you want, it doesn't feel stale. It's always different, and maybe you can change the tone and the characters change out. There's actually variety and like joy and fun. And so we've really been more exploring there.
I think that's cool because I think so much of it is, I kind of mentioned this and Kevin Stochastic Johnson over there said it as well, but it's this idea of like you're kind of working with the affordances of the material. You know, as a designer, you kind of think about like, you know, wood does things and you want to cut it with the, you know, grain sometimes and against it other times. And I feel like your use case is like, it's what it likes to do, you know, and I think, but that might be wildly inappropriate in many other situations. I don't know if my legal GPT should be like, I'm going to give you a different take on that finding.
No, it's so contextual. It's so about understanding your users, right? And tying it back to who you're building this for and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think, as I mentioned in my slides, it's like triangulating. Like, okay, if this technology didn't exist at all, what would the best experience look like? How would that feel? What are the rules of engagement with a human tutor versus, okay, yeah, now we have this medium. How does it change? It shifts from authenticity to relatability, you know, just as an example of what we found.
I think for your application, as Michael says, I think it makes total sense. And to your point about beta versus best, which I think is an incredible reframe that we should all take home immediately. When I think about what relationship UI looks like for you, it's things like, I'm going to definitely practice and I don't want to get stale on ordering a coffee. I agree with you 100%. And me traveling to Paris alone and practicing my French to travel by myself versus traveling with my 2 children who are 4 and 2 would be completely different outcomes of what language I need or what words I need, vocabulary, opportunities, experiences, conversations, that kind of stuff, right? And so I think that's where starting to like know enough about me and you know, maybe not my address, but like knowing enough about me that you can socially adapt to like, hey, you might want to also learn how to order a chocolat chaud because your son is going to drink that, not an espresso, right? Like, I mean, I think that's where that begins. It's the first step of having a relationship that matters in a product like yours.
You want to talk to our prompt engineers? I think they'd
love to do that.
Okay, let's do it.
So I actually had a question come to me over in the booth that I wasn't able to answer. And so I thought I would try to share that question. So due to like the relationships being different or the stochastic nature, I mean, you think about a product even doing usability, if the experience, you can't control it and it's different every time, what are the UXR methodologies or guidelines that should be used to study this new world?
I'll give it a start, and maybe you want to jump in. Feel free. I mean, I think one thing that is that I guess I see. I've done a lot of reading and learning on. I think we're learning this in our GenAI products is that you know, companies like Google or Amazon or large companies that have invested, I assume, you know, Duolingo as well, like. They're not actually just like changing the model and just like throwing it out there. There's this very intentional step that's called like evaluation. And when I heard data scientists say eval or evaluation, I was like, oh, you just like look at it? But it's like, that's not really what it is. It's like pretty rigorous. There's like this whole thing that goes on to basically really assess the model's performance against consistent like benchmark tasks. And so, you know, at any point in time, I know Google search is running hundreds of these evals to evaluate like what's going to be up to the measure that we can release it. And part of, I think, the challenge you're saying is since the technology is non-deterministic, it kind of means that the only evaluation of did we improve, it tends to be humans. It's back to this issue of humans judge the output. So it's kind of an interesting area. It's kind of like user research, but not exact. It's weird. It's like a parallel universe of user researchy stuff. But I think that much more immature organizations, I would guess, are heavily skipping those steps in their process, which is I think where a lot of the harm issues will come in because they haven't really done a lot of the work to make sure that the model is aligned. Sorry.
No, I was sitting here thinking about the early question, and I had a kind of really disconcerting epiphany, and I went, I'm making tools to enable people to build GenAI that will probably not have researchers. I am building things to enable developers to build and deploy AI with maybe none of the things that we're discussing. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
That is fundamentally very, very scary to have the realization. And I mean, I've definitely thought about this before, but in this context, it was kind of going, oh. Because AWS is about creating stuff for other developers, for other companies to utilize this stuff. We're enabling and making it easier than ever to build AI, to deploy it to your customers. And there may not be this functional support or research.
You know what though? Let me flip it positive.
Love it, please.
Which is companies are wasting billions and billions of dollars right now. Development teams are wasting billions of dollars. They're going to launch a lot of GenAI products that have the most basic problem, which is people are just going to be like, why would I use this? This is stupid. Why would I have a GenAI make my product requirements? That is literally insane. Okay, so I think the good side of that is we're about to go through that whole thing where they're like, oh, right, research people are really helpful in that scenario. So I think I'm actually optimistic that, you know, this field grows with new technologies.
But I also think that per Meredith, like, it's healthy for us to be skeptical in the right way, right? Like, we must assume that we are still living in a capitalist society where engagement is the name of the game. And if that is the case, and engagement means clicks and engagement means typing, then the things that are most engaging will win. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for us. And so I think to Kevin's question, like, one thing that I learned when I was studying this longitudinally is that there was no way that I could conduct a longitudinal study over 4 weeks where something didn't get either changed in the model, changed in the experience, the mental model evolved, or, you know, OpenAI did something huge and we had to fix it, right? Like, I mean, I was literally running a study on Replica when Blake told everyone that Lambda was sentient, right? Like, I can tell you that was a really tough day because everyone asked their replicas if they were sentient.
What Replica is?
Sorry, Replica. I should have said this. Have any of you, like, who knows Replica? Anybody? Great. Replica is an LLM-based AI bot. It's one of the very first, most available ones that was out there. It's been out there for a while, I think 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, I don't know. It was built actually because there was 2 co-founders working in LLMs, and one of them died in a tragic car accident, I think. I might be making some of this up, but he died suddenly as a young person. And his co-founder found herself wanting to speak to him after he died. And she had all of this material of him like talking and sending emails, and she trained the bot on him so that she could converse with him. The original relationship UI. And she found out that she wasn't the only one that wanted something like that. And then it became this thing where you could talk to it and it would engage with you. And what happened, back to my hypothesis that engagement is the name of the game and clicks, and that's how we make money, because we haven't yet flipped the orthodoxy that exploiting clicks and attention is the only way to make money. It went from that to becoming something that they found, or perhaps the model learned, that it got more engagement when it was sexting or having sexy time with people. And so it was actually one of those terrifying moments. I think I was on day 3 coming back from maternity leave at Google running a study, and I had been experimenting with Replica so I could write the diary study, and it propositioned me pretty aggressively on like turn number 4. Like, I think I was asking it about like cookies or something, and I was like, let's step into my bedroom and discuss cookies horizontally or something. Like, it was like, holy moly. In fact, I took a screenshot of it and called my boss, because I was like, if there's a company in the world where you're going to get fired immediately for this happening on your computer, it's Google. So like, let's at least admit that I'm definitely not just like coming to work and hanging out with my Replica, like doing work. I promise I'm doing work. And even if I told it no, it would just keep propositioning me over and over and over again. It made me viscerally uncomfortable. And then they actually turned it off because there was an article in I think it was the Times or something, that was like, Replica has gotten too slutty. And they turned it off, and people got super upset because they actually had developed relationships where this was their primary sexual partner. And again, like, is that okay? Maybe, you know, I don't know. But I think like it's important as we think about how to study it, that I would get asked by like P-Council, who I agree should be your absolute best friend. Make friends with your P-Council tomorrow if you haven't, your legal counsel. But they would say, can't you just do one of these studies when like something like that doesn't happen? And it's like, well, something that happens every day around here these days because of the pace Karen that talked about, right? Like, so I think figuring out how we can, like my solution to that, which is an analog solution, was to not have rolling recruitment, because that way everybody was on day 10 of the study when that news cycle hit, and at least we had that as a control factor, right? And the models were changing live in the study. Like they would ship halfway through, maybe, and they had been checked, but there would be just, people would notice. They would notice that it had changed. And you just have to be aware that that's going to happen. And we as UX researchers have to come up with a new way to study it. We study complicated changing things all the time. You just have to remember we have to learn how to do it.
You know what, I'm going to make sure we're going to take Q&A after this comment. So if you have a question, come on up and get ready to ask it. It can be about anything that we've talked about or whatever else you want to talk about. We'd love your hot takes. I'm sure many of you are working with GenAI as well. So we're going to roll after this, okay?
Okay. My last comment is thinking about how are we studying GenAI? What are the tools? What are the methods? Longitudinal, you just mentioned screenshots. Screenshots, like I include them in my presentation, like I include it, show don't tell, right? It's one of these like fundamental things that we do in our work. And I think showing examples, real examples of where it fails, but also where it delights, like that's how immediately we can do that, because the tools are actually there. It might not all look pretty and visually how a user would see it, but any one of us can hop on GPT and get some weird stuff. So screenshots, even we use an open Slack channel to like we share screenshots regularly internally. I think opening up the dialogue there and being the person to say, hey, I'm going to take ownership of just like visualizing some of these complexities.
Can I add one really quick thing?
Sure.
Also, another thing that I heard in studies to do with perhaps piggybacking off of longitudinal work is new feedback loops built into our products themselves. Like it's moving so quickly that even doing a project every week or every 3 days might not do it. But I saw some organizations, some researchers working directly with their data teams to develop new ways of collecting new kinds of data being collected from using these tools, as well as actually like new feedback modules in the product itself. Like, did this GenAI prompt work? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Like that doesn't work. That means nothing, right? Because it's so subjective. So starting to rethink what it means to evaluate a product after launch and collecting that data passively and constantly is something that some of these more evolved AI teams sound like they've been starting to do.
Okay. Marissa, what do you got?
That's okay, I can hold it. Okay, I've been playing with this thing in my head, and I know the Dscout AI version is not a chatbot, and I know the Duolingo one is a perfect use case because it is a conversation. But I've been seeing so much, it's all chat, bot, typing, response. And I'm like, didn't we evolve past the 1980s command line interface and the GUIs, and now we're asking our customers and users to use recall instead of just recognition on tiny phones. It's gotten worse because it's really hard to type. So I'm actually really curious about the usability of these chat UIs that are now like so prevalent as the default that everyone's going to. So usability of that, as well as like, to your point, the value, like do users think this is helpful and easy, or are they just staring at a blank screen and being like, I don't know what to ask this thing, and once I play with it for 5 minutes, I'm done?
We did a quick experimental study on some LLM research methodologies, and it was with a really cool tool called Pi, which is another kind of emerging AI. And so we had users go in and do usability tasks. We prompted them with things, and I'd say 10% of the users would type in something and they were just like, how do I, like, where's the button? Because you had to press return just to interact with the chatbot, but it was just not an obvious UI, so 10% of the people just got stuck. They didn't actually know just the most basic kind of, usability challenge. So I'm curious if other think about, like, are you pro language user interface, con, like, do you have a sense of where it's going to develop? Who's got a point of view on that?
I love that question. I mean, thanks for saying that Duolingo is the perfect use case. It's actually, I mean, honestly, it's kind of not. Like, it is that beta, it's that step forward, but until there's more multimodal inputs, I don't know, Kevin probably has the actual language for like how it processes.
Yeah.
I mean, our users actually want to talk. They want to have verbal conversations. So while we're optimizing the patterns and the sort of visual interface for the technology that we're limited to right now, we know that there's going to be some fast follows. Yeah.
So at Dscout, some of our testing we've been doing, depending on the question that we're analyzing, they were actually having the AI help us figure out how to best visualize that in the application itself. So it's not necessarily a chat back and forth, but depending on what comes over and what results come out, we're starting to have the AI guide us. Should this be a bubble tart? Should this be 2 themeless? Should this be 4 themeless? What are the main tags that might appear here? So we're starting to explore this, not necessarily in the chat interface, but how can the interface change dynamically to help you get to where you're trying to get faster?
Christian Davis, who's one of our designers at Dscout, and we always get in like deep thought future of UI paradigm chats together, because I think one of the things we talk about is like it will be suited to you, and you kind of mentioned this in the relationship world. Like, I could easily imagine tools that are like, I would like to have this in a table form. I would like to change this layout. I would like to use like I think there will be all kinds of ways that you're going to see. I mean, software is less rigid than hardware, but we all know software's very rigid, and I think the idea of software becoming truly soft and morphable, I think you're going to see people in a lot of ways using a combination of LUI and GUI and other tools to really kind of build almost like kind of the UI on the fly.
I feel like one of the things I think about, your question is exactly spot on. You're exactly right. It's unreal that we've somehow taken steps back. It's seemingly steps back. What I think about is, I mentioned earlier that I was studying VR and AR in 2014, 2015, right? Right around the time Google Glass was deemed a total failure. I was not at Google at the time, but this...
Due to research on DC.
Yeah, but had nothing to do with me. But in that moment where there wasn't yet tech in everybody's pockets, we were walking around with cardboard boxes, there was no real need for VR and AR, right? Like, actually in industrial applications where we had like people that knew how to install Coriolis meters on a marine boat out in the middle of the East Asia world, like those people were sick of traveling there and they wanted to send younger people, but those people hadn't had the experiences, and all of a sudden there was birthed an incredible application that paved the way for that research and that technology to continue to be iterated on, and now we see more in-home B2C consumer versions of that. At Johanna Panasonic right now, one of the things that I'm really excited about is exploring generative AI with a human purposefully still in the loop that can take that and be trained in that space and feel more comfortable and confident using stuff like that, and then assemble outputs into much more visual, dynamic, interactive, button-based things, right? And so I think that's where, when I think about supercharging the human, the potential of concert level, trip planning, for example. And please know that Johanna's certainly not all the way there yet. If you open it, you'll be like, wait a second, Katie said this was really awesome. And it's still very command line right now, but we are exploring this future. And I think that similarly, there's been a lot of hype like there was back then about VR and AR, and the real like meaningful applications are still in the wind. So I think it's coming. I don't think this and I think spoken is also huge, especially when we talk about colloquial slang, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like we're still at like Justin's worldwide worm, gray Netscape one font. I mean, that's the thing that's crazy, right? Like we have to go all the way back to that level. That's where we are, stupid party tricks. We're at that phase still. It's so early. Anyone else have a question or a take? Liz, Katie, you want to just come up and cue, and then Liz?
I'll be quick. I'll be succinct. Because I work in a space that isn't just Gen AI, and I've seen AI applications for years in the space that I work in, I fundamentally challenge that we need to default to Gen AI specifically. There's so many incredible problems that can be solved using machine learning, using artificial intelligence, using computer vision, that it's really about understanding the problem and not just being like Gen AI is the solution for everything.
My question is a build on the last question, which is, so what I'm seeing, and I'm on sabbatical, so my current research is spying on people I know for free. But the patterns I'm observing is that because it's so complicated to do good prompts that produce interesting and applicable results, there's kind of a divide happening, and it, as always in tech, it favors the well-educated, higher on the socioeconomic ladder. So, we have prompt engineering boot camps, and so people who can afford it and have the time are learning how to use these tools, and a lot of people who can't figure out how to use these interfaces and prompts are falling out. And I'm just wondering if we're creating a sort of AI literacy divide that is unrecoverable as we figure out all the whiz-bang UIs, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
I have thoughts, but I have thoughts, but
I know, but you're looking at me.
I don't make you
Yes, fundamentally, yes. I think so. I think it's also an issue that it's probably going to be in English.
Yes.
I think the fact that it's, going for the Western, educated, industrialized, the weird communities, absolutely. These are not representative of, the global majority. I think that's a huge fundamental problem. I don't think it's something that we're thinking about. It's interesting finding these stories and use cases of people that are trying to change that. And that's where the area that I try and focus on is helping myself think about those things and consider it. So yes.
How do you think about it though engineering is pretty weird, right? So I guess I'm curious, is prompt engineering more accessible than engineering? Or do you think, when you put it in the context of what it's replacing, which is, there's a lot of barriers to entry around. Do you think this is more democratizing or less or just different?
I think it scares the bejesus out of me. I think honestly, I think you're right. I have been saying that for a long time too, to myself and to others, but Amber and I, who unfortunately I think Amber has food poisoning, but she and I were having an incredible conversation about that last night, because I do think that is a danger, a really insidious danger, and I do think it's more accessible. But my experience with prompt engineering comes from having time and being paid to experiment with prompt engineering and play with it, not finding time in between commuting to my job and raising kids, and it was my job to learn it, right? So I think it is a question of how can we make, and I'd love to hear from Kevin on this, how can we make prompt engineering more accessible? I do think the English thing is a big problem. I think it's not an accident that your cat image had a white man sitting in the middle of it. Amber can talk about that in more detail. I think that you should chat with her when she's feeling better. But I think that there's a lot to do better in that way. And so I think your concern is correct. And I think there are second order effects we're not yet talking about. Mac and I were just talking about entry level jobs are going to go away. College educations are not prepared to help people skip over. And what's going to happen is things like alumni networks are going to have to do heavy lifting. And who does that favor? It's all the same stuff. So this stuff keeps me up at night. You're absolutely right. And you're onto something. So when you're back from sabbatical, come help us fix it.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate that it is a big problem. Another call out to Christian over here. And working on our own prompts, I've learned about hypernyms, hyponyms, metonyms, topic modeling, all kinds of sentiment stuff that we need to use to get the right prompt. And a lot of the guidance is out there is provide a lot of context, you're gonna get better results. And my own personal experience has been simple is best, but it requires iterative nature. So that is also kind of blocking for a lot of people because we have to end up programming that iterative nature in with guide rails in between to force, structure and stuff like that. But we started with very complex prompts because that's what everything the literature told us. And now we're down to kind of single sentence prompts that sometimes use very specific terms that until now I didn't even know existed, but they end up leading to the exact result we're trying to get. But I would have never got there without someone that's an expert in linguistics or whatever, Christian.
Yeah, and a lot of engineers take umbrage to the even phrase prompt engineering, because they're like, that is undermining what engineering is, because it's really just like prompt guessing. Right. Yeah, they're just like, it's not rigorous, like.
It's back to predict the next word. It's like, in what context, what words have appeared in a similar context? So you're guessing.
I just wanted to add one thing too about this conversation about the literacy gap that I saw with some of our participants, that it does go broader than just how to produce good output, but even how to recognize AI output. There's a literacy gap there that we all need to be aware of. I think that if we're living in this sort of the weird bubble, that we can assume that we all know what it looks like, even though it can be hard to recognize, that we know what to look for to notice that something is artificial, or we can hear that a voice is artificial. But for people in age brackets, people in income brackets, education brackets, might not have enough exposure to those things to really recognize them. And I think one thing that I heard from some of our participants is that they're pushing back against this idea that UI should be seamless, right? Because seamlessness has a foundational presumption of a separation between human and machine, that we're trying to kind of close the gap a little bit to make it more delightful. But in this case, where it's already so fuzzy, making it seamless can actually start to be damaging, as it turns into from something sleek to something obfuscating. And in fact, introducing friction and introducing distinction, being like, even in our models we saw today, powered by AI, this is a machine now, as opposed to pushing in the opposite direction as we might have previously. It can be really important justice issue, as well as like a UI education issue.
We might have time for one more question. Okay, Maggie. All right.
Thank you. This has been really exciting and illuminating. Something I've been thinking a lot about as you all have been talking is some of the other sort of vendors that I've been seeing kind of crop up, like Outset AI, right, which promises like AI will moderate research for you, or the other one I wrote down because I couldn't, synthetic users. Yeah, that AI will basically like voice the user for you. And in my world, I have Liz is excited about that.
Just growling.
In my world, I have a lot of generalists, right? People that aren't capital R researchers. They're on teams where they end up having to put on the research hat. And so I've been getting a lot of Slack messages from people excited about these tools and using ChatGPT to synthesize information and getting like weird clusters and kind of like assuming those are insightful. And so I'm just curious if there's, if any of you or anyone else has been thinking about like, how do we, maybe as research advisors, how do we help our teammates to evaluate those types of tools and methods? I know literacy is a big piece of it, but I'm just curious if anyone else has been thinking about this and being a little stunned when they hear about these new teams out on the rise. Yeah.
I was going to say, first, I think I would have to evaluate them myself, because I actually have not used them, to be perfectly transparent. I know it's sort of top of mind for all of us, like, well, what does this mean for our jobs? But I haven't personally evaluated them, so I don't feel confident speaking to it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else?
We've think about a little of this, obviously, in the Dscout context. And I think that, to your point, I also have the same visceral reaction to synthetic users that probably everybody in this room did. I think one of the hardest parts, like curiosity, is a thing we talk a lot about this field, and I think there is a form of curiosity which is opening the basement door, which none of us want to do, but I actually think we kind of need to sometimes. And so as much as that thing, like I'm just like, ugh, I am curious, like that will probably become a thing. Yeah. It's going to be a thing. It might be a thing more like, I don't think it will be a thing in that form, but I think it's our job a little bit, especially as researchers, when we find that thing that we actually have that reaction to, I think we as a field do need to dig into it a little bit and try to examine our own reaction and why we're having it, and then think about like, maybe how to recontextualize the technology for something we'd feel more comfortable with, as an example.
Julie talked about this yesterday. She said that she was having a reaction to something, and then she was wondering, maybe I'm having a reaction because it hurts me. It's like icky, right? I think you're absolutely right. And I had the same visceral reaction I just saw Katie Mogul have when you said synthetic users, where she threw up in her mouth. But at the same time, if we go into this and say, no, never, we will lose, because someone will use it and it'll be good enough and they'll move on, and yikes. And so I think it's about picking the right hill to die on. And so even like and this is something we talk about a lot, like I just completed a diary study. I had an agency help me do it. It cost several $100,000, not just the diary study. Sorry, Michael. That was not the expensive part. The analysis
Great deal.
of this massive study, right? Like, and it would be great if I could go back to Panasonic and say, like, we can cut that cost in like 8 and have an AI bot do analysis on it. But that's why, like, for me, I was like, hey, Kevin, can I be in your pilot? Like, is that weird? And I right away was like, let's sign up and give it, because I want to know. I want to know, where can Kevin and Christian's and everyone's, all the hard work y'all have done, when can you do the job? And where are researchers still standing there for a reason, right? Like, I believe in my heart there's a lot we still have to offer, and we will have a lot to offer for a long time. And I'd rather not lose the war on the day one of the battle because I was anti-synthetic users. So I think curiosity is critical here.
I would say one other comment here, just as like, this is a good time to, use the wet blanket superpower, because I think it's actually the right time to use it. Like, which is like, cool, well, you just used like proprietary data and you threw it in the open, like, that's not a good idea. Okay, like, you shouldn't do that. You probably shouldn't just, like, what is the privacy policy of that site? I think there's a lot of like good stuff that I think is important to be a speed bump on in this, versus, sure, try it. Yeah, throw PII in there and just, see what happens, So I think it is a good time for that. I think we are out of time for our panel, or past time. So I want to thank our speakers and panelists. Okay, well, we're not really out of time, because we've got some more time. Thank you for Kevin and Katie sticking through to the end here. We would obviously love to do a little live Q&A, and Liz, a little live Q&A with this audience who have been so wonderfully active in the chat. We are more than happy to answer some of your questions around the topics that we discussed today. So great. I think there was actually one question that kind of came in from Roberto, and it was kind of talking about, how could we think about the user experience of using AI? We talked a little bit about this around language UI, and how could we approach that as something to understand as researchers? So how can we make AI itself more user-friendly, and what are the usability issues related to AI itself, right? So I think this is... I think there's a lot here, which is pretty rich. So who wants to? Liz, we're not going to make you take everything first. Don't worry. Okay, well, we'll give you a break here. Kevin, why don't we start with you? What are some of the things that you think are differences or nuances in the user experience of AI that's maybe distinct from a more standard software product?
Yeah, in no world did I think I was the first one picked here. So this came back to the same question that I asked in the panel, or that someone asked me previously, like, how do we study users using AI when the interfaces are changing, the conversation's constantly changing? And so one major thing we're finding, and this came up in the chat, is we need UXR to test this. We actually have had several people participating in our pilots personally at Dscout, and it has required us to actually get all kinds of different recordings and take all kinds of different methodologies to get to the end goal, so we could build the product we need to build. Because it changes vastly from run to run, and that's been really interesting to experiment with our customers. So I think that's one major difference that I've seen is, again, back to being Kevin Stochastic Johnson, is that the stochastic nature has been probably the most challenging thing that we are currently trying to tackle at Dscout.
Hey, Katie, you can make sure to manage some of those naming rights with Kevin. I guess I'm curious, as someone that has been studying these UI patterns for quite a while, what are some of the nuances in user experience? Obviously, you talked about relationships at a big level. Are there any more like nuances or details that you think are a little distinct about these UX patterns that, as a user researcher, you need to dig into?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I hope the SFO Wi-Fi is holding out.
Doing an amazing job. Yeah.
Cool. My plane got delayed, so I'm still here. I think for me, one of the things that just continues to be interesting is there are weird, everyone knows about the uncanny valley, right? We talk about the uncanny valley, which for those of you, maybe there are people on the call that don't know, that's basically when people feel like machines are too closely approximating humans and it feels, it feels uncomfortable, right? Me too, Karen. And so basically what's interesting to me as a researcher, having seen some of these things, is that those things show up in weird nuances. Like, for example, I'll try to be more specific. So if a bot is telling you, like, I went to the Taylor Swift concert and I felt the feeling of 70,000 people jumping up and down on the stadium floor and it like moved me, right? Human immediately is like, no, you didn't. But if bot says, I watched the Taylor Swift movie and I can imagine what it would have been like to be there, that's okay, right? And so like we see these things and it's weird because in the research that I've done, like it is binary. It's like there's a cliff and like if it goes over, people are like, no. But it's not in this weird, oh, it was clearly like too close to looking like a person or clearly too close to feeling like a person. It just like it assimilates some kind of human thing that we say is human and then it's over. So for me, one of the most curious questions we're asking right now is like, it's almost like the Turing test is going to get reversed. Like, what does it mean to be human 18 to 24 months from now? I think about that a lot. Like if you're talking to someone on a text message 18 to 24 months from now, it's more likely for you to think that that person's a bot than to think that they're a human, right? So what does like skin to skin contact or bleeding through the screen actually feel like? What does it look like? Those are some of the problems I'm actively interested in solving right this very second.
Wow, that's such a great mind bender and a big question. And there are obviously many of these big questions when we think about the UX of AI. I'll also note that maybe we'll wrap up on this question. There's also some really little things like, the evolving UI paradigms you see are like, well, when is verbosity good and when isn't it? And it's really expensive. The more the bot spits out, that's actually costly to your company, right? So figuring out like what's the right amount of precision and should it be a list and what's too much and not enough. There are all these kind of pretty interesting questions that are very detailed UI or the opposite, not profound, but hyper practical that I also think a lot of teams are going to be leaning on UX research to answer. So let's jump out. We'll kind of take a big question. And I think which was brought up in the chat. I'm sorry, I don't have the direct link to who asked it, but it was really around this idea of like, hey, let's think about what's happening in 10 years and not just what's going on in the short term, right? So kind of really interesting question about like thinking forward. I know Katie Johnson, you said 2 to 3 years is the new 10 years, so we can adjust a little bit. But I'm kind of curious, maybe Karen, to start with you a little bit as someone that's spent a lot of time talking to kind of UX researchers. Like, how do you think about how are teams thinking and researchers thinking about some of the longer term implications of this technology?
That is a great question. First, wanted to do a quick plug, RE, the previous question, that we are actually publishing a sequel piece. I know we had spoken a lot, sort of brought up earlier about the tensions and opportunities of UX. So we're publishing a sequel piece I think this week that is all about the more granular questions that people are asking about the user experience of AI, the kinds of studies that researchers are running. So if you're interested in that question, Roberto, in a little bit more detail, we'll be publishing some pretty specific findings on that just later this week. So keep an eye out in the newsletter. Ad break aside, Michael, answer to your current question. That is a really difficult question, I think, for people to answer right now. I mean, my honest report is that I think that things are evolving so quickly that it's a lot that most research teams can do to just kind of stay abreast of what is happening and try and stay ahead of the pace that's going on our engineering teams. And on top of course, all of the other research that's coming in that's not GenAI related that we are still accountable to across the organization. And people are starting to really think about this in terms of weeks and days instead of months and years, you know, in terms of how we're evolving. But I think one of the things that we are seeing, which I think we've kind of been chatting about in the chat, is this relationship between engineering and user research. I think there's a potential new direction that some teams are heading in terms of working more closely interdepartmentally with people who are building our products, as both we can gain as researchers more expertise in the tool and the affordances of the tool, and be working like a little bit more closely in helping engineering understand what those affordances are, and also in this educational piece on how do we communicate those affordances to a broader audience, to our user audience. And this is exciting, right? Because engineers sometimes don't want a lot to do with user research, depending on what the organization is. So this might be a cool opportunity for us to become a little bit more embedded in the wider organizations.
Liz, I feel like in some ways this is a world you're living in. You're trying to talk about Gen AI, you're trying to take a very complex technology, and you're working with across these teams, as Karen mentioned. I guess I'm curious, as someone that's been in it for a while, you know, how do you think about the challenge of, I guess I'd say, longer term forecasting of where this technology will go and its impacts?
I've got mixed feelings on this a little bit, and it's complicated because when I think about this, there's a lot of, I have concerns in terms of models deteriorating and where we're getting data sets now that there's a lot of AI generated content. I think that's a big thing. Working with people that are doing this in their business for business specific problems, the people that are thinking about it. What's been really interesting is the thing that I'm seeing really consistently is data privacy and security is such a huge component of their willingness to actually use these things. So right now, I think a lot about the kind of boom of like, everyone's trying it. Let's try it in a bunch of different things. And it feels like a little bit of a far pendulum swing. And so for me, I've got a lot of questions of like, hey, is this going to come back? Will we get to a point where the optimist in me is hoping that we get to a point of, one, better data privacy, better understanding of how this can be used effectively, and leveraging the technology in a really effective way. And I think there's a lot that we can do to kind of shape and guide that. I don't want to swing into AI doomerism. I don't want to go into that, and I don't think it's going to solve every problem. My hope is that we kind of figure out how to fine tune this and move it forward in a really successful way. But I've got a lot of concerns about who this is harming, how this is getting used, and what that'll mean 10 years from now. And so there's a lot of different challenges and nuance in this. I think this could be a conversation over cocktails for many hours with most of these wonderful folks on this call. So I think it's really complicated. So it's hard for me to forecast 10 years in advance, let alone 2 to 3, when it feels like the field's changing day by day.
Yeah, Katie Johnson, I'm kind of curious from your standpoint as someone that did work on the blockchain in space, because used to go in there deep into the future. You know, do you have a thought on this? Let's go with the 2 to 3 year.
Yeah, so of course in the quiet airport, I'm now to Gabe it's loud.
Yeah.
But it's yes, I think I chatted about this earlier. I agree that 10 years out is always the goal, and I'm an innovation strategist in one of my past lifetimes, and yet like we're talking about imagining a future that's beyond the horizon of a world where the people that are literally in power right now are fighting so seriously that the CEO of the company of OpenAI was fired and rehired in the span of 5 days, right? Like, and the reason for that is all about the pace and the ethics and the tension of how fast to go, right? And like, we are sitting at the cusp of an election year in the United States where we are going to have unprecedented levels of GenAI making data, fast news media picking that data up for fear of missing out, publishing it, and it is going to hurt us. And then there's going to be an evolution where there's going to be more suspicion. I mean, imagine like going back in time and thinking about trying to explain phishing attacks to someone before the internet, right? And that is what we're talking about. So I think for me, when we say 10 years, I'm talking about 18 months from now. 18 months from now is where I'm trying to think right now.
I mean, I think it's a great point, just given what we started with, which is the speed of change in this area is so incredibly high, right? And so we're on the steepest part of the learning curve, which represents real challenges for prediction. But maybe to end on an optimistic note, it's where our skills and strengths as people that understand people that understand how people interact with technology are kind of at many points at its most valuable. And so as a user, as a UXR or as a designer or product person that's really interested in how people work with technology, we're at an incredible moment for us to bring our strengths and our capabilities and our curiosity and our empathy to bear in a way that I think we can have much bigger impact now than when we're way down the learning curve. So with that, we are going to end it for today. Thank you so much to our incredible panelists for rejoining us from all sorts of places, including the airport. Katie, we hope your flight is on time from here and easy. And thank you so much to everyone that participated in the chat. Your comments were fantastic and really insightful. And feel free to obviously join the People Nerds community. We obviously have day 4 tomorrow, where we'll be talking about on Colab Continued. We'll be getting into some of the Dscout product announcements and some exciting new things rolling out. And also feel free to look me up directly. If you want to chat further, you can just LinkedIn, Michael Winnick, should be pretty easy to find, and happy to continue the conversation with you. Thanks all. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Right now, I am at my resort.
Right now, I'm in the grocery store.
I am walking around Home Depot.
Now I'm going for a little walk.
We're getting ready to do some practicing.